Welcome to the Historical Podcast. Say the name Cleopatra. And what comes to mind? Perhaps it's the image of Elizabeth Taylor, with kohl-rimmed eyes, draped in gold. Perhaps it's a story of seduction, of a queen smuggled in a carpet to bewitch a Roman general, or the tragic tale of an ASP hidden in a basket of figs. These are the images that have echoed through 2,000 years of poetry, plays, and films. But what if that story, the one we all think we know, is one of the most successful and enduring propaganda campaigns in history? What if the woman we remember as a temptress was, in fact, one of the most formidable political minds of her era? Welcome to our deep dive into the life of Cleopatra VII Philopator. We will journey back to the 1st century BCE to uncover the real woman behind the myth. She was a scholar who spoke at least 9 languages, a ruthless strategist who outmaneuvered her rivals, a diplomat who commanded the respect of kings, and the last pharaoh of Egypt. For more than 2 decades, she stood at the center of a collapsing world, using her intellect, her wealth, and her will to hold the colossal power of Rome at bay. This is not the story of a queen who was a pawn in the games of powerful men. This is the story of a queen who was a player, and who very nearly won. We will explore the mind of the queen, not just the lovers of the woman, and separate the facts of her life from the fiction crafted by her enemies. Part 1. The World of a Princess. A Precarious Inheritance, Ptolemaic Egypt in the Shadow of Rome. To understand Cleopatra, we must first understand the world she was born into in 69 BC. It was a world of fading glory and imminent threat. She was not, as many assume, ethnically Egyptian. She was Greek, the heir to the Ptolemaic dynasty, founded nearly 3 centuries earlier by Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals. For almost 300 years, her family had ruled Egypt, blending their Hellenistic culture with the ancient traditions of the pharaohs, creating a unique synthesis of Greek and Egyptian life. They were crowned by Egyptian priests and depicted on monuments as pharaohs, yet they governed from the Greek-speaking, multicultural metropolis of Alexandria. However, by the time of Cleopatra's birth, the power of the Ptolemies was a shadow of its former self. The kingdom was hemorrhaging strength, weakened by generations of bitter internal family conflicts and costly foreign wars. And looming over the entire Mediterranean was the expanding, rapacious power of the Roman Republic. The relationship between Egypt and Rome was not one of equals. It was one of dependency. Egypt was a client state, a kingdom whose independence was conditional, maintained only by the grace and greed of Rome. This dynamic was personified by Cleopatra's own father, Ptolemy XII, a man derisively nicknamed Auletes, the flute player, for his decadent lifestyle and artistic pretensions rather than any political skill. He clung to his throne by one method alone: bribery. He paid enormous sums to powerful Roman leaders like Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar, earning the official title friend and ally of the Roman people. But this friendship came at a staggering cost, nearly bankrupting the Egyptian treasury and making his rule deeply unpopular at home. The precedent was set. Egyptian survival depended on Roman patronage. The internal politics of Alexandria were now inextricably linked to the power struggles in the Roman Senate. This reality was cemented when Ptolemy XII, facing a rebellion, was forced into exile and was only restored to his throne by a Roman army. He even went so far as to declare the Roman Senate the guardian of his dynasty and the executor of his will. This was a formal concession of ultimate authority. From the moment Cleopatra was born, it was never a question of if Rome would intervene in her reign, but when and on whose side. Her entire life, her every political calculation, would be a masterful effort to navigate and direct this inevitable Roman intervention for the survival of her kingdom and her own power. The education of a future queen, forging a mind as a weapon. While her father's reign demonstrated the perils of weak leadership, Cleopatra's childhood was spent forging the very tools she would need to overcome them. Her classroom was Alexandria itself, the intellectual and cultural capital of the Hellenistic world. It was a cosmopolitan hub of Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, and others, home to the legendary Mouseion and the Great Library, the largest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. Here, She received a royal education befitting a future ruler. Her tutor, the philosopher Philostratos, instructed her in the Greek arts of rhetoric, oration, and philosophy, skills essential for debate and diplomacy. She studied history, medicine, and the arts, and had access to records of her powerful female pharaonic predecessors, women like Hatshepsut and Sobonfru, who provided models of strong female rule. But Cleopatra's intellect went far beyond a standard royal curriculum. Her greatest intellectual asset, and one of her most potent political weapons, was her gift for languages. By adulthood, she was fluent in at least 9 tongues. Her native Koine Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Parthian, and several other regional dialects. Most remarkably, she was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to take the time to learn the native Egyptian language. This was a revolutionary act. For centuries, her Greek-speaking ancestors had ruled as a foreign elite, separated from the majority of their subjects by a language barrier. By speaking Egyptian, Cleopatra could communicate directly with the priests, the landowners, and the common people, bypassing translators and forging a bond her predecessors never could. This was not merely a sign of intellectual curiosity. It was a calculated political strategy. Learning Egyptian was a direct appeal to a crucial power base her father had alienated, signaling a new kind of rule that respected native culture and traditions. Her broader multilingualism was a clear reflection of her expansionist territorial ambitions. She was preparing herself to reclaim the lost territories of the Ptolemaic Empire in Africa and Asia, and she intended to negotiate with their leaders in their own languages. Her education in rhetoric armed her for the negotiating tables of Rome. Her knowledge was not a passive accomplishment, it was an arsenal. She was proactively forging her mind into a weapon, transforming knowledge into political capital in preparation for the immense challenges she knew she would face. First lessons in power, exile, and usurpation. Cleopatra's education in the brutal realities of power began long before she took the throne. She learned through observation, watching the disastrous reign of her father. His aloofness and lavish spending, coupled with his humiliating inaction when Rome annexed the island of Cyprus, which was ruled by his own brother, sparked a popular uprising in 58 BC. Ptolemy XII was forced to flee Alexandria and went into exile. It is highly likely that the young Cleopatra, then only about 11 years old, accompanied him on his journey to Rome. This trip would have been her first direct exposure to the sprawling, chaotic heart of the Roman Republic, a first-hand lesson in its intricate and deadly politics. While they were gone, her ambitious older sister, Berenice IV, seized the throne for herself. For 3 years, Ptolemy XII lobbied in Rome, eventually securing the backing of the Roman general Aulus Gabinius, who had a young cavalry officer named Mark Antony under his command, to invade Egypt and restore him to power. Upon his return in 55 BCE, Ptolemy XII took his revenge. His daughter, the usurper Berenice IV, was executed. For the teenage Cleopatra, this was a lesson written in blood. Power was not simply inherited. It was won and held through absolute ruthlessness. And most importantly, it was secured with the backing of Roman swords. She had learned that to survive, let alone to rule, she would need to be smarter, bolder, and more ruthless than any of her rivals. Part 2. The Alliance with Caesar, a Queen's Gambit. The Exiled Queen and the Arrival of Rome. In 51 BCE, Ptolemy XII died, leaving his precarious kingdom to his 2 eldest surviving children, the 18-year-old Cleopatra and her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. As was Ptolemaic tradition, they were to marry and rule as co-monarchs. But Cleopatra had no intention of being a co-ruler, especially not with a child brother who was merely a puppet for his ambitious court advisors. From the very beginning, she made a bold power play. She began issuing official decrees and minting coins that featured her face alone, dropping her brother's name and image entirely. It was a clear declaration of her intent to rule as an absolute monarch. This audacity, however, provoked a backlash. A powerful cabal at court, led by the eunuch Pothinus, the general Achillas, and the tutor Theodotus of Chios, controlled the young Ptolemy XIII. They saw the ambitious Cleopatra as a threat to their own influence and, In 49 or 48 BCE, they orchestrated a palace coup, driving Cleopatra from Alexandria. But the courtiers had underestimated their queen. Cleopatra did not accept defeat and fade into obscurity. Instead, she demonstrated immediate and formidable resilience. She fled to Roman Syria, where she used her connections and what remained of her resources to raise her own mercenary army. Within months, she was back on the borders of Egypt, encamped near the fortress of Pelusium, ready to wage a civil war to reclaim her throne. The stage was set for a clash between the sibling rulers. It was at this precise moment that the internal politics of Egypt were irrevocably swamped by a much larger conflict, the Roman Civil War. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar decisively defeated his great rival, Pompey the Great, at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece. The defeated Pompey fled, seeking refuge in the one place he believed he had allies, Egypt. He had been a patron of Cleopatra's father, and he expected sanctuary. Ptolemy XII's advisors saw an opportunity. In a disastrously cynical miscalculation, they decided the best way to curry favor with the victorious Caesar was to eliminate his rival. As Pompey stepped ashore, he was ambushed and murdered. His severed head was preserved as a gift for Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria shortly thereafter, he was presented with this gruesome trophy. The plan backfired spectacularly. Caesar was not pleased. He was horrified and disgusted by the treacherous murder of a Roman consul and his former son-in-law. The Egyptian court had just shown the most powerful man in the world that they were treacherous, foolish, and unreliable. In doing so, they had unwittingly opened the door for their exiled queen. The audacity of the carpet, political theater. Caesar took up residence in the royal palace and, asserting his authority as the representative of Rome, summoned both Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII to appear before him. He would arbitrate their dispute. For Ptolemy, this was a simple matter of appearing before the Roman, but for Cleopatra, it was seemingly impossible. Her brother's forces controlled Alexandria, and she was a declared enemy of the state. To enter the city openly would mean certain death. What followed was not an act of seduction, but a masterful piece of political theater. Cleopatra devised a plan of breathtaking audacity. She was rowed into the harbor at dusk, hidden from the enemy patrols. There, according to the historian Plutarch, she was rolled up inside a bed sack, or, as legend has famously embellished it, a carpet, hoisted onto the shoulders of a loyal servant, and smuggled past her brother's guards directly into Caesar's private chambers. Imagine the scene. Caesar, the 52-year-old conqueror of Gaul, is in his quarters when a servant unrolls a bundle at his feet, and from it emerges the 21-year-old queen of Egypt. The impact would have been electric. This was not about feminine wiles. It was about demonstrating character. It showed Caesar, a man who famously valued boldness and risk-taking, that she was his equal in courage and ingenuity. It proved she was resourceful enough to bypass an entire army to state her case. In one brilliant, daring move, she had completely upstaged her brother's grim gift of Pompey's head and seized the political initiative. She had proven she was a player, not a pawn. A meeting of minds, the symbiotic alliance. The Roman propaganda that would later be deployed against Cleopatra would paint her relationship with Caesar as one of a manipulative foreign temptress, bewitching an aging Roman. The reality was far more complex and pragmatic. Theirs was a symbiotic relationship, an alliance forged in mutual need and mutual respect. It was a meeting of two of the sharpest political and strategic minds of their time. Their needs were perfectly complementary. Cleopatra, for all her brilliance, needed Caesar's hard power, his legions, and his unparalleled military authority to defeat her brother's forces and secure her throne. Caesar, in turn, desperately needed what Cleopatra possessed: immense wealth. He had legions to pay and a political future in Rome to finance. Cleopatra was reputedly the wealthiest woman in the world, and her kingdom was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, a vital source of grain for Rome. A stable, friendly Egypt was a strategic necessity for him. Their alliance can be seen as a merger of two powerful entities. Caesar brought the military and political might of Rome. Cleopatra brought staggering financial resources, control over a critical food supply, and the divine legitimacy of a 3,000-year-old pharaonic tradition. Beyond this pragmatism, there was a genuine connection. Caesar was a brilliant intellectual and an accomplished ladies' man. Cleopatra was not just a queen, she was an irresistible conversation partner. As Plutarch noted, whose charm lay as much in her intellect and wit as in her appearance. They were both ambitious, ruthless, and visionary. It is no wonder they recognized in each other a kindred spirit. The Alexandrian War and the birth of an heir. The alliance was immediately put to the test. When Ptolemy Xi's court realized they had lost Caesar's favor, they turned their army on the palace, laying siege to the district where Caesar and Cleopatra were quartered. The Alexandrian War had begun. For months, Caesar's small force was trapped, fighting desperately in the streets of the city. Finally, Roman reinforcements arrived, and in the spring of 47 BCE, Caesar's legions crushed Ptolemy's army at the Battle of the Nile. The young king, Ptolemy XIII, drowned in the river while trying to flee, his reign and life coming to an ignominious end. With her brother dead, Cleopatra's throne was secure. Caesar, ever the canny politician, maintained the appearance of tradition by having her enter a nominal marriage with her youngest brother, the 12-year-old Ptolemy XIV. But there was no question who held the real power. Just a few months later, in June of 47 BCE, Cleopatra delivered her ultimate political masterstroke. She gave birth to a son, whom she named Ptolemy Caesar, but who would be known to history by his nickname, Caesarion, or Little Caesar. While Caesar never formally acknowledged the boy in Rome, doing so would have been politically explosive, as he was married to a Roman woman, Calpurnia. He allowed the use of his name. For Cleopatra, this was everything. She now had an heir, and that heir carried the name and the blood of the most powerful man in the world. She immediately leveraged this for maximum political effect. On the walls of the Temple of Hathor at Dendra, she commissioned reliefs depicting herself in the traditional style of a pharaoh, presenting her infant son, Caesarion, to the gods. The iconography was clear and powerful. She was the goddess Isis, and her son was the divine child Horus. The implied father god was, of course, Caesar. It was a brilliant piece of propaganda, cementing her son's legitimacy in the eyes of her Egyptian subjects and linking her dynasty directly to the divine and to Roman power. In 46 BCE, she took her victory lap. Cleopatra, her infant son, and her puppet husband Ptolemy XIV paid a state visit to Rome, where they lived in a lavish villa owned by Caesar across the Tiber River. The visit scandalized conservative Romans, but Caesar doubled down on his public support for her. In an act of extraordinary significance, he erected a golden statue of Cleopatra, depicted as the goddess Venus Genetrix, the mythical ancestor of his own family, in a newly built temple in the heart of Rome. The message was unambiguous. This was not a mere dalliance. This was a partnership of global significance. Cleopatra had won her throne, secured her dynasty with an heir, and now stood recognized at the very center of Roman power. Part 3. The partnership with Antony, forging an Eastern Empire, navigating the void, the Ides of March. Cleopatra's carefully constructed world, built on her personal alliance with Caesar, came crashing down on the Ides of March, 44 BC. While she was still in Rome, Julius Caesar was assassinated by a conspiracy of senators. Her protector, her partner, and the father of her son was gone. Her entire strategy was in ruins, and her position was suddenly perilous. She acted with the swiftness and decisiveness that would define her reign. She did not panic or wait for events to overtake her. She immediately left the chaos of Rome and returned to the relative safety of Alexandria. Once there, she moved to consolidate her power with chilling ruthlessness. Her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIV, died shortly after their return. While the circumstances are murky, it is almost certain that she had him poisoned. She would tolerate no more rivals within her own family. In his place, she elevated her 3-year-old son, Caesarion, to be her official co-ruler, now styled as King Ptolemy XV Caesar. She was now the sole, undisputed adult monarch of Egypt. As a new Roman civil war erupted, pitting Caesar's allies, led by Mark Antony and Caesar's young great-nephew and heir, Octavian, Against his assassins, Cleopatra played a shrewd and patient game. She officially supported the Caesarian faction, but she held back her immense resources, waiting to see who would emerge as the dominant power from the wreckage. The spectacle at Tarsus, a summit of equals. By 41 BCE, the assassins had been defeated, and the Roman world was partitioned among the victors of the Second Triumvirate. Mark Antony, as the senior partner, took control of the rich eastern provinces. From his new headquarters in Asia Minor, he summoned the various client rulers of the East to appear before him. Among them was Cleopatra, who was called to Tarsus to answer for her supposed lukewarm support during the war. Once again, Cleopatra turned a moment of potential vulnerability into a stunning display of power and public relations. She did not arrive in Tarsus as a subordinate client queen coming to grovel. She arrived as a goddess coming to meet a god. The historian Appian described her magnificent entrance. She sailed up the river Cydnus in a spectacular barge with a gilded stern, purple sails, and oars of silver that beat time to the music of flutes and lyres. She herself reclined under a golden canopy, dressed in the robes of Venus, the Roman goddess of love, surrounded by attendants dressed as cupids and nymphs. The entire city of Tarsus emptied to witness the spectacle, leaving Antony sitting alone on his tribunal. He was a man who appreciated grand gestures and who styled himself as the new Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. He was, as Appian wrote, at once conquered by her. Their partnership was formed, and like her alliance with Caesar, it was based on a powerful combination of mutual affection and cold political necessity. Antony, planning a massive and expensive military campaign against the Parthian Empire to the east, desperately needed Cleopatra's money and supplies. Cleopatra, in turn, needed Antony's military protection to secure her kingdom and his political authority to restore the former glory of the Ptolemaic Empire. The donations of Alexandria, a declaration of war, the culmination of their shared ambition, and the act that made war with Octavian inevitable, came in the autumn of 34 BC. After a minor military success in Armenia, Antony staged not a Roman triumph, but a lavish, Hellenistic-style triumphal procession through the streets of Alexandria. The ceremony, which would become known as the Donations of Alexandria, was a breathtakingly bold political statement. Antony and Cleopatra sat on golden thrones elevated on a silver platform. She was proclaimed Queen of Kings, and her son by Caesar, Caesarion, was declared King of Kings. Then, Antony proceeded to divide the known world among their children. Their son Alexander Helios was named King of Armenia, Media, and the yet-to-be-conquered Parthian Empire. His twin sister, Cleopatra Selene, was made ruler of Cyrenaica and Libya, and their youngest son, the toddler Ptolemy Philadelphos, was granted Syria, Phoenicia, and Cilicia. This was the point of no return. It was a public and unambiguous declaration of their intent to establish a new, rival empire based in Alexandria, with their own children as its dynastic heirs. It was a repudiation of Rome's primacy and a direct, personal, and unforgivable insult to Octavian. The battle lines were drawn. There was no longer room in the world for two rival visions of empire. Part 4. The Final War and the Legacy Exit. The War of Words, Octavian's propaganda machine. The final war between Octavian and the combined power of Antony and Cleopatra was fought first not with swords and ships, but with words and images. Octavian, a master of political communication, knew that launching another Roman civil war against Mark Antony, a famous and still popular general, would be deeply unpopular in Rome. So he executed a brilliant strategic pivot. He declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. This masterstroke of political framing allowed him to cast the entire conflict as a foreign war, a defense of Roman values against a dangerous, alien threat. He unleashed a vicious and highly effective propaganda campaign to assassinate Cleopatra's character. She was painted as the Meretrix Regina, the whore queen, a decadent and depraved Eastern monarch who had used sex and sorcery to ensnare the noble Antony, turning him against his own country. Octavian's narrative contrasted the masculine, disciplined virtues of Rome with the decadent, effeminate luxury of Egypt. This was ancient fake news, and its centerpiece was Antony's will. In 32 BCE, Octavian illegally seized Antony's last will and testament from the Temple of the Vestal Virgins and read it aloud to the horrified Senate and people of Rome. The will, which may have been forged or at least heavily embellished by Octavian, reportedly confirmed Antony's territorial gifts to Cleopatra's children and, most shockingly, expressed his desire to be buried alongside her in Alexandria, not in Rome. This was the proof Octavian needed. It demonstrated to the Roman public that Antony had gone native, abandoning his Roman identity and intending to transfer the capital of the empire to Egypt. This propaganda won the war before the first battle was even fought. It turned Roman public opinion decisively against the couple, stripped Antony of his support and legitimacy, and gave Octavian the moral and political justification he needed to rally Rome behind him for a final, decisive conflict. The image of Cleopatra the seductress is not an objective historical portrait. It is the ghost of Octavian's political strategy. The accounts of her life that have survived were written by Roman historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio, decades or even centuries later, under the empire that Octavian founded. They were writing within the victorious narrative, and their works are inevitably colored by this successful propaganda. Our modern challenge is to see through this ancient spin to find the brilliant political operator it was designed to obscure. A chronological anchor for Cleopatra's life. To keep the key moments of this complex life clear, let us pause and look at a timeline of the pivotal events that shaped Cleopatra's journey, from princess to queen to legend. Year 69 BCE. Cleopatra is born in Alexandria. This meant that the last Ptolemaic ruler was born. Years 58 to 55 BCE. Ptolemy XII is exiled and Cleopatra likely travels with him to Rome. This meant her first exposure to Roman power, and a harsh lesson in political survival when her sister Bernice IV is executed. Year 51 BCE. Ptolemy XII dies and Cleopatra, at age 18, ascends the throne with her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy XIII. This meant the beginning of her reign and her assertion of dominance over her co-ruler. Year 48 BCE. Cleopatra is exiled by Ptolemy Xi's court and famously meets Julius Caesar after being smuggled in a carpet. This meant a daring political move that secured her the most powerful ally in the world. Year 47 BCE. The Alexandrian War ends and Ptolemy XIII dies. Cleopatra is restored to the throne and gives birth to Caesar Ion. This meant her rule is secured by Roman military support, and she ties her dynasty directly to Caesar. Year 44 BCE. Caesar is assassinated in Rome. Cleopatra returns to Egypt and has Ptolemy XIV killed. This meant the loss of her Roman protector and her ruthless consolidation of power by making her son co-ruler. Year 41 BCE. Cleopatra meets Mark Antony at Tarsus and forms an alliance with him. This meant the start of her second major Roman partnership aimed at creating an Eastern empire. Year 40 BCE. Antony marries Octavia in Rome, while Cleopatra gives birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. This meant intense political maneuvering and the birth of children, symbolizing a dynastic future. Year 37 BCE. Antony reunites with Cleopatra and abandons Octavia. This meant the final break with Octavian and a turning point in the growing Roman conflict. Year 34 BCE. The donations of Alexandria take place. This meant a public declaration of a new Eastern Empire, making a clash with Rome inevitable. Year 32 BCE. Antony divorces Octavia and Octavian declares war on Cleopatra. This meant the end of diplomacy and the start of open military conflict. Year 31 BCE. Antony and Cleopatra are defeated at the Battle of Actium. This meant a decisive loss that destroyed their imperial ambitions. Year 30 BCE. Octavian captures Alexandria. Antony and Cleopatra commit suicide, and Caesar Ion is executed. This meant the fall of Cleopatra, the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and the final loss of Egyptian independence. The Battle of Actium, a strategic defeat. On September 2nd, 31 BCE, the War of Words gave way to a war of warships. The massive fleets of Antony and Cleopatra met the navy of Octavian, commanded by his exceptionally brilliant admiral, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, in the Ionian Sea. off the coast of Actium in western Greece. Antony's forces were already at a disadvantage. They were suffering from disease and desertions, and their supply lines had been cut by Agrippa's skilled maneuvers. The battle was fierce. Antony's fleet was composed of large, heavy warships, powerful but less maneuverable than Agrippa's lighter, more agile vessels. As the day wore on and the battle turned against them, Cleopatra made a decisive move. Her squadron of 60 Egyptian ships, which had been held in reserve, suddenly hoisted sail, broke through the chaotic battle lines, and fled south towards Egypt. When Antony, fighting on his flagship, saw her fleet departing, he abandoned his own ship, transferred to a smaller, faster vessel, and followed her. Their remaining fleet, leaderless and demoralized, fought on for a time before surrendering to Octavian. For centuries, this has been portrayed as the ultimate act of cowardice and betrayal, with Cleopatra fleeing and her bewitched lover foolishly abandoning his men to follow her. But a more sober, strategic analysis suggests this was not a panicked flight, but a pre-planned maneuver. Victory at Actium was looking increasingly unlikely. The goal likely shifted from winning the battle to surviving the war. The most critical asset they had, apart from their own lives, was the vast Egyptian royal treasury, which was loaded onto Cleopatra's flagship. The breakout was a desperate gamble to save themselves, their treasury, and a core part of their fleet, with the intention of regrouping in Egypt to continue the fight. The plan failed because their land army and the rest of their navy surrendered soon after, but it was a calculated risk, not a moment of weakness. The last days in Alexandria and the death of a queen. The defeat at Actium was the beginning of the end. It took Octavian nearly a year to consolidate his power and march his legions to the borders of Egypt. In August of 30 BCE, he arrived at Alexandria. Antony's remaining forces, a shadow of their former strength, were swiftly defeated. The final tragedy unfolded with Shakespearean drama. Antony received a false report that Cleopatra had already taken her own life. In despair, he fell on his sword. As he lay dying, a messenger arrived with the truth. The queen still lived. Antony's loyal guards carried him to the mausoleum, a grand tomb she had built for herself, where Cleopatra and her two most trusted handmaidens, Iras and Charmian, had barricaded themselves. He was hoisted up the walls and died in her arms. Now alone, Cleopatra was left to face the victor. She met with Octavian, perhaps attempting one last time to negotiate for her kingdom or for the lives of her children. But Octavian was implacable. He had one final use for her. He intended to parade her in chains through the streets of Rome as the centerpiece of his triumphal procession, the ultimate symbol of his victory and her humiliation. This was a fate Cleopatra would not endure. A queen, a pharaoh, a descendant of gods and kings, would not be a spectacle for a Roman mob. She made her final, sovereign choice. On August 12, 30 BCE, she prepared for her legacy exit. When Octavian's guards broke into her mausoleum, they found her dead, dressed in her full royal regalia, lying on a golden couch. Her handmaidens were dying beside her. The legend, immortalized by Shakespeare, says she died by the bite of an asp smuggled to her in a basket of figs. It was more likely an Egyptian cobra, a creature that was a symbol of divine royalty and the protector of the pharaohs. To die by its bite would have been a final, defiant statement of her status. Whether it was a snake or a fast-acting poison she had prepared, the choice was hers. In her final act, she seized control of her own destiny and denied Octavian his ultimate prize. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Octavian, wary of any potential rival claimants to Caesar's legacy, had her eldest son, Caesarion, hunted down and executed, reportedly remarking that 2 Caesars are one too many. Her children by Antony were spared and taken to Rome to be raised by his spurned wife, Octavia. With the death of its last queen, 3,000 years of pharaonic rule came to an end. Egypt was annexed, becoming a personal province of Rome's new master. The Ptolemaic dynasty was over. Conclusion: the enduring echo of a queen. Cleopatra's legacy was contested from the moment of her death. The version of her story that dominated Western history for 2 millennia was the one written by her conqueror. In the Roman narrative, crafted by Octavian's propaganda, she was the fatal monster, the exotic foreign seductress who corrupted a great Roman general and threatened the very fabric of their civilization. This image served its political purpose perfectly, justifying Rome's conquest and obscuring the uncomfortable truth that the fall of the Republic was a Roman affair. But in the East, a different memory endured. Later Coptic and Arab historians remembered her not as a temptress, but as a scholar, a scientist, a builder of cities, and a powerful monarch. The 6th century Coptic bishop John of Nikiu praised her as the most illustrious and wise amongst women. This was the queen who patronized the Library of Alexandria, who engaged with her people in their own language, and who fought to preserve her kingdom's heritage and independence. Today, with the benefit of critical distance, we can see through the layers of propaganda to the remarkable figure beneath. Cleopatra was a brilliant political operator who used every tool at her disposal: her formidable intellect, her kingdom's immense wealth, her mastery of diplomacy and public relations, her strategic use of religious iconography, and her powerful personal alliances to defend her nation's sovereignty against the greatest superpower the world had ever known. She was not a victim of history, nor was she a mere footnote in the stories of Caesar and Antony. She was a central actor on the world stage, a player in the great game of empires. For 22 years, she matched wits with the titans of Rome and came astonishingly close to forging a new destiny for the Eastern Mediterranean. Her story is not simply a tragedy of love and loss. It is a timeless and encouraging testament to intelligence, to resilience, and to the indomitable will of a queen who refused to bow.